Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. This is the newly released rendering of the Spanish Fork, Utah temple, and when I first saw it today, my jaw dropped. You might remember, if you've been watching my channel for a while, that shortly after this temple was announced by President Nelson, I made this video called Hidden Things, President Nelson's Talk in the Spanish Fork, Utah Temple. I found out some interesting things that seem to be related to this temple. But things have gotten even more interesting now that we know what it's going to look like. So we're going to start off talking about the Spanish Fork, Utah temple. But as I was doing the research for this video, it led to other places, things beyond just this temple district, things that apply to the entire church. There are so many things that we've noticed on this channel that are in plain sight, but hidden. If you don't really know, if you don't understand the history behind certain things, you don't do the research, you just wouldn't know. So I'm going to share with you what I found. So we'll start with this church news article. Spanish Fork, Utah temple rendering released. Here's a first look at the final House of the Lord announced by the late President Russell M. Nelson. Now, when I made my video, we didn't know that President Nelson was going to pass away later that year. I noted that, let's just go to his talk. So his final talk that he gave in General Conference as president of the church was called Confidence in the Presence of God. And at the end, he announced a number of temples. And the last one was the Spanish Fork, Utah temple. I don't know what it was exactly. Maybe just the fact that it was the last one to be announced, because I had noted previously in other general conferences that sometimes they save the best for last, or maybe the more historic temple announcement for last. And something just stood out, right? Right after he announced this, so after he was done with the list of temples, he said, "I testify that Jesus Christ, the Redeemer of Israel, leads this, his church. He is preparing to come again." So immediately a reference to the second coming. "May we likewise prepare to receive him." These are President Nelson's final words in General Conference. It's so interesting. Okay, let's go back to the article. This is by Joel Randall. In his final General Conference address as prophet, President Russell M. Nelson testified that regular worship in the house of the Lord increases one's capacity for virtue and charity. I think this is one of those hints that we were given to prepare for the second coming. He said that in order for us to feel confident in the presence of the Lord, we need to focus on these two things specifically: virtue and charity. All right, continuing. Quote, "Time in the temple increases our confidence before the Lord. Increased time in the temple will help us prepare for the second coming of our Savior, Jesus Christ." End quote. He added in his conference message an announcement of 15 new temples to be built, the last planned for Spanish Fork, Utah. It was the final temple that he announced before his death in September 2025. So already, with just what we've talked about in this video, already it feels like something interesting is going on. But there's more. Let's do a quick review of what we talked about in that first video that I made. In that video, I referenced this. This is Digital Collections BYU Library, Encyclopedic History of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And for this video, I don't know why I didn't do this the first time. I normally would, but I didn't save this to my spreadsheet. So I've added a new row on quotes A through Z for the Spanish Fork, Utah temple, and it now has this. But I found what I think is a better source. We're going to go to archive.org. There's this book called Ancestry, Biography, and Family of George A. Smith, compiled by his granddaughter, Zora Smith Jarvis. Okay. So, and it's so interesting too. Today, I went to Far West. I don't know how often we go there, maybe 3 or 4 times a month, like when I need to get out of the house. Sometimes we'll go on a Sunday because you can't go to the temple on Sunday. And I feel like this is the next best thing. So we went to Far West. And at Far West, you have the four cornerstones. And the primary cornerstone, the southeast cornerstone, over to the right of these three monuments, this is the cornerstone that two apostles were ordained on. After the saints were driven out of Missouri, there was a prophecy that had been recorded before in Doctrine and Covenants stating that the apostles needed to leave for their missions from the temple lot, the Far West temple lot. And so they did. And when they came back, there were a couple vacancies in the Quorum of the 12 that had to be filled, two in particular. And they were filled by Wilford Woodruff, who later became president of the church. He was ordained an apostle on this cornerstone. And then George A. Smith. And this is who we're talking about in this. This is a letter that he sent to, I'll just read it. So this is Salt Lake City, December 26th, 1852. Brother Samuel W. Richards, Your welcome and interesting letter dated Liverpool, September 3rd, 1852, was duly received at Provo City on my return, December 5th, from Iron County. During our tour, I visited all the settlements south of Great Salt Lake, except San Pete, which I was deterred from visiting by a heavy fall of snow and other unavoidable causes. Okay, so that's the kind of like the background, the context in which he's speaking. Later on, he says, since April, sorry, I should probably zoom in. Since April conference, I have twice visited all the settlements from this place to the rim of the basin, traveling each time about 700 miles, and have preached in every neighborhood. I have sought out the location for the city of Palmyra on the Spanish Fork, Utah County, and procured a survey of 360 lots containing 100 rods of ground each. Now, before I continue, this is in Utah. There is an area called Palmyra close to where this city was going to be built. What ended up happening is it was basically abandoned. There was a fort, Palmyra, but over time it became Spanish Fork. Okay, so he's basically talking about Spanish Fork. So he talks about, okay, so we procured land, and then he says a temple square of 13 acres and 4 school squares, and then he continues. But he mentions a temple square, and it's capitalized with a capital T and a capital S. So when I made that video, I didn't know where the temple was, this Spanish Fork, Utah temple was going to be built. But now we know, it's been announced. And I went back and did the research again. There's a historical marker for the southwest corner of Fort Palmyra. This is on a blog, jacobbarlow.com. It looks like he's a realtor. So maybe if you need a real estate agent, maybe you can contact him. Just pause and then take his number down, or visit this website. I'll put the link in the description box below. He took a picture of this for his blog. And I went through, I read on historical marker database, the plaque. It didn't really talk about a temple square or shed any light on that. There's another marker in that vicinity. And this one didn't really explain anything about a temple square. It just kind of gave a general history of that area. But this is where the old Palmyra was going to be. This is the southwest corner of Fort Palmyra. And in modern day, you do have a Palmyra, Utah. I think it's an unincorporated area, but it carries that name. And so I went to my Google Earth map, and I pinned this. So there's the marker right there that we were just looking at. You see that? zoom out, and I'll show you where the temple is going to be built. It's going to be built over here, like in Spanish Fork proper, as you would expect. So again, this was the southwest corner over here, the southwest corner of Fort Palmyra. That doesn't mean that it's the southwest corner of what was going to be the city of Palmyra. So I don't know. I don't have a way to like figure out if this new temple is going to be built where the temple square was going to be. For all I know, maybe the city was going to be over here, what is now Spanish Fork. But that's just something to think about. But that's not the main point of this video. We got more to talk about. But I just want to point this out. I don't know if this is some kind of fulfillment of that. I don't know if you would call it a prophecy, but it's similar to Far West. I fully expect that someday in the future, hopefully sooner than later, we will see a temple at Far West and at Ammon and here in Independence, Missouri, as well as a lot of people don't know about the city of Seth. It never got started, but it was between Ammon and Far West, and it seems that it would have had a temple as well. So I'm just wondering if this is connected. We'll have to let time go by, let the church grow larger, and maybe at some point there will be an actual Palmyra temple. Maybe they know where that temple square was going to be, but for all we know, maybe this fulfills that. I don't know. But let's move on from that. I told you at the beginning I was interested by the rendering, that my jaw dropped. And my jaw dropped because how do I explain this? It has two spires. And the rendering makes it appear that one spire is higher than the other. This is significant. It turns out, after what I just learned, this seems to be really significant. And it all goes back to this. This is Ammon. When you go to the Tower Hill area and you walk down the path, they have two like signs that you can read. And one is for this like little bump in the hill. You have this concrete block that marks the site of Adam's altar. Let me just read a couple things about that really quick. I've done a lot of research. I've collected a lot of information about it, but let's talk about this. So first, I guess we should do it this way. Let's go to Elder Alvinar Dyer. At this time, he was assistant to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. He later became a member of the First Presidency. And you can find this. This is on BYU Speeches, February 7th, 1967. The name of this talk is The Center Place of Zion. He had a very special mission to help the church acquire Ammon and beautify Far West and build the Independence Visitor Center. But he says this, okay? He was involved in all like the Missouri Historic Societies, and he knew this period of church history very well. All right, he said this was during a trip with President David O. McKay and Joseph Fielding Smith and others. Our automobile rested in the large valley of Ammon at the base of Spring Hill, and we could clearly see Spring Hill, on the bluff of which a temple site had been dedicated, and where the altar of Adam once stood, which was used for sacrifice. Okay, so you have an altar on Spring Hill for sacrifice. It's no longer there. I'm not going to get into all that, but you can read in his book, Refiner's Fire. It gives us a hint of what may have happened to it. So an altar on Spring Hill. Okay, Spring Hill. Continuing. The other altar on Tower Hill, which is also nearby, was usually used for prayer. And according to the prophet Joseph Smith, this is the altar where Adam gathered together his children at eventide. But the altar of sacrifice, wherein the angel of the Lord appeared unto Adam and asked him why he offered sacrifice, and he said, I know not, save the Lord hath commanded me. And that altar is on the place we call Spring Hill near the temple site. I'm going to show you a map so you can like picture this. Well, let's go to the map right now. Let's leave Utah and come over to Missouri, just like me. This is Adamonte-Ammon. Here's the valley of Adamonte-Ammon. Here's Grand River. I've taken away all the other markers just to make it clear where the two altars were located. So the altar of prayer, this is the one that most people see and they don't know what they're looking at when they come here. This is the altar of prayer. And then if you were to follow the trail and go up the hill, you'd come all the way up here to the temple site. I realize that there's some debate about this, but it seems like the consensus in President Alvin R. Dyer's opinion is that this was the temple site. Somewhere over here is where the altar was. So you have two altars, okay? Again, we're tying this into this temple and other temples. We have two spires, one higher than the other. I'll explain more in just a minute. Let's go back to this. Let's look at what President Heber C. Kimball said. He was somebody that was actually there when the Saints were first there. He tells a story of Joseph Smith wanting to show him and Brigham Young and others something. Joseph Smith said, "Brethren, come, go along with me, and I will show you something." He led us a short distance to a place where the ruins of 3 altars built of stone. So it's basically all one altar, but it's like 3 pieces. 3 altars built of stone, one above the other, and one standing a little back of the other, like unto the pulpits of the Kirtland Temple, representing the order of 3 grades of priesthood. There, said Joseph, is the place where Adam offered up sacrifice after he was cast out of the garden. The altar stood at the highest point of the bluff. So, Adamonte-Ammon, as far as we know, this is basically the first temple site, unless like Adam and Eve built some other altars, like temporary altars on their way to Adamonte-Ammon. It would seem that this is basically the first temple site. And you have these 2 prominent locations, 2 altars, one for prayer, one for sacrifice. When you go into, and Heber C. Kimball just said that the altar of sacrifice looked like the pulpits in the Kirtland Temple. And as you know, on one side of the temple, you have pulpits for the Melchizedek priesthood, and on the other side of the temple, you have 3 other pulpits for the Aaronic priesthood. So here's a picture I took in the Kirtland Temple back in 2024. Here's a picture I took recently, just a couple weeks ago, at the new Nauvoo Temple Visitor Center. They have a model of the Nauvoo Temple. It also had an assembly room, and you have the same pulpits. They don't look exactly the same, but they're laid out the same. So 2 sides of the temple, 2 sets of pulpits. This idea of 2, and they represent Aaronic priesthood and Melchizedek priesthood, and it seems like it goes all the way back to Adamonte-Ammon. Okay. Then we have the Salt Lake Temple, right? The Salt Lake Temple is one of those temples that has an assembly room. And the spires of the Salt Lake Temple are not the same height. I feel like this is a well-known fact. I may be assuming too much, but let's go really quick to my quotes A through Z spreadsheet, row 588 for Salt Lake Temple. This is Truman O. Angel, and he was the Salt Lake Temple architect and the brother-in-law of Brigham Young. This can be found in Millennial Star. I guess he was asked to write this piece for the British Saints so that they could like picture what the Salt Lake Temple was going to look like. He like did a very detailed explanation of what it's going to look like. And at this part, he said, each tower has a spire and 12 pinnacles, emblematical of the first presidency, 12 apostles, high council, bishops, and their counselors, etc. The east spire, meaning like the central spire in the east, rises 200 feet. The spire on the west center rises 194 feet. Okay. So the Salt Lake Temple, you have one side that represents the presidency of the Melchizedek priesthood, like the first presidency. And then you have the other side that represents the presidency of the Aaronic priesthood, um, the presiding bishopric. I think I have another quote that makes that clear, but yeah, I do. It's from Harold B. Lee. But you have the two sides. And then the Salt Lake Temple also has an assembly room with the two sets of pulpits. Okay. Now, I don't know when I realized this. I don't know if it was after I moved here to Missouri or if it was when I was still living in Kansas near Wichita. But I looked at the Kansas City Temple and realized it has two spires and one is taller than the other. And I thought about the fact that as of right now, this is the closest temple that we have to Independence, Missouri, the site of the New Jerusalem. So I feel like this is a special temple just for that reason. It's also the closest temple that we have to Adamonte in far west. So it's in a special place. So I realized this at some point a while ago, and and then I started to realize, oh, there are other temples that have two spires and one's higher than the other, but it's not like that with all temples. Um, what I did, I've been meaning to do this for a long time. I went to that one website, um, Temples of the Church of Jesus Christ. Sorry, Temples of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's not an official church website, but they do the best at tracking temples in new developments. I went here and in chronological order, I went temple by temple by temple and checked for spires. This is something I've been wanting to do for a while because I had noted that there were like really prominent like temples in important locations that seem to follow this pattern. And I wasn't prepared for what I was going to find after doing this exercise. So let me share with you what happened. I'm excited for this. Okay. Okay, let's close this folder, historic sites. Okay, we're going to go here. Okay, so how do I do this? Sorry, I feel like I always feel like I have this like all nice and planned, but then it doesn't quite. Okay, so the Salt Lake Temple. Okay, the Salt Lake Temple. I'm gonna turn these two off. The Salt Lake Temple has the two central spires, but it has a total of 6 spires altogether, right? Okay, so you have. It turns out you have a set of temples that have 6 spires, starting with the Salt Lake Temple. And these other temples that we're going to go through, they follow the same pattern. They have 6 spires and the 2 central spires on each side. One is higher than the other. So Salt Lake, and then you have the Washington, D.C. temple, which I think we would all agree that Washington, D.C. is a very significant place. Um, it's our nation's capital if you're a citizen of the United States. And you could say it is basically the capital of the world. It is where the power sits, like the whatever, you get what I'm saying. Sorry, I'm tripping on my words. But you have this. It follows the same pattern. It has 6 spires, and that central spire, I guess that this would be on the east side, is higher than the one in the back. And then after this, in the 80s, you had a series of temples that all kind of look the same. I don't think that they were modular because it seems like modular temples is a newer concept, but they at least seem to follow the same architectural blueprint. But you have these temples that, as viewed from the top, they're kind of like hexagonal. And, you have this like really dramatic kind of like roof that almost feels like it goes all the way to the ground. It doesn't, but it's a very interesting looking temple. And then you have these kind of like detached spires. This is the Boise, Idaho temple. I'm not sure how many there are like that. We'll just count it up. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. What I'm about to show you, I may have missed like one or two things potentially, but I did the best that I could. But anyway, you have these temples. So you got Boise, Manila, Philippines, Dallas, Texas, Taipei, Taiwan. Here, let me zoom out. Taipei, Taiwan, Guatemala, Stockholm in Sweden, um, Chicago, Illinois, Johannesburg, South Africa, Seoul, South Korea, Lima, Peru, and Buenos Aires. So with these temples, the two that really stand out for me are the Salt Lake Temple and the Washington, D.C. Temple. Chicago is a very prominent city, so is Dallas, but we do have temples in lots of big cities, so it's not really too big of a surprise. But this is where you have the hexagonal six-spired temples, right? But now let's look at the two-spired temples. And this is where it gets kind of interesting for me. I'm going to turn on the two-spired temples where one spire is taller than the others. Okay, so we're going to look at the United States. As it turns out, all those temples are in Utah for the most part, with a couple exceptions. You have the Vernal Utah Temple. You have the pretty new Layton Temple, which is actually very similar looking to the Kansas City Temple. The Brigham City Temple, which was built at the same time as the Kansas City Temple. I think that they have the same design. Smithfield, Utah. You got the Logan Temple. It's a Pioneer era temple, but you can see one spire is higher than the other. So there are a lot of temples in Utah that follow this pattern. You don't see it anywhere else for the two spire temples, except for the Kansas City, Missouri temple. And we already talked about why that is a significant temple because of its location. And then the only other one in the United States, anyway, is the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania temple. And just like the Washington, D.C. temple, this is a very significant city because of its history, because of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So I'm starting to think that this is intentional. When they choose to do temples that have two spires, one is higher than the other, it seems like it's intentional. Why aren't there other temples like that in the United States? You don't have any in Canada. You don't have any in Mexico. Come down here. Do we have any in South America? No. Where are the other ones? Let me turn this on. Yeah, okay. So we got the Rome, Italy temple. This might be where I first thought about this because I don't know. I think that might be the first time when I saw the Rome, Italy temple. Let's look at it here on Google Earth really quick so you can just clearly see it, right? And you can see it in the picture too. Now, this is obviously a really significant temple, as evidenced by this very rare picture where you have all 15 apostles attending a temple dedication. And here they are in the visitor center, an incredible picture. President Nelson said that the dedication of this temple was a hinge point in the history of the church. There were a lot of special things that were done with this dedication, but the temple itself follows this rarer than I thought pattern of having two spires, one higher than the other. Let's see. Okay. Let's talk about the Ephraim, Utah temple. The Ephraim, Utah temple is really interesting. Let's do this. Let's turn on eclipses, and then we'll just turn on all temples. Let's turn that off for a second. Sorry, this is a little bit of a review. Let's head back over to the United States. We had these 3 very interesting eclipses. The first one went over all the church sites in Missouri. Okay, you see that right there. This was in 2017. It was on President Monson's 90th birthday. And then the second great American eclipse went over our church sites over here, the Sacred Grove, Fayette, New York, and then the Kirtland Temple. And I was there to witness that from the Kirtland Temple that had just been purchased the month before. Well, in between those 2 eclipses, we had this eclipse. This one was an annular solar eclipse. The other 2 were total solar eclipses. But there is a path of annularity. You can see it right here in red. And it went through Utah, and it missed all the temples except for one. There was only one that was in operation at the time, the Monticello, Utah temple. Up here, however, you did have 2 other temples, but the Manti, Utah temple was under renovation. And then the Ephraim, Utah temple barely made it within the path of annularity for that eclipse. So that's one thing that's interesting already about the Ephraim, Utah temple. But there's also this. We have this from President Nelson. Okay. This you can find this on YouTube. Ephraim, Utah temple groundbreaking full ceremony. Is at the 22-minute and 14-second mark. All right, he said, "We are here today because of a recent event shortly after the April 2021 General Conference. I received very clear instruction that the Manti, Utah temple should be preserved and that a temple should be built in Ephraim, Utah." So let's just highlight the fact that President Nelson President Nelson is there personally in the first place for the groundbreaking of this temple. He informs us that he received very clear instruction that this temple should be built. And then on top of that, we had one of these rare events where there was like rain, but then the rain let up for the groundbreaking. He talks about it up here in this paragraph, and then it's also noted in this Deseret News article. I'm not going to read this, but you can pause and read it. Additionally, the Ephraim, Utah temple, if we go to my spreadsheet called Prophets Talks, these are all the talks that President Nelson gave conference by conference. Okay, you see these different conferences. Column Q was to track the number of temples he announced in each conference. And during his presidency, there was only one temple that was not announced in General Conference, and it was the Ephraim, Utah temple. And not only was that the only one that he announced outside of conference, it was the 70th temple that he announced. And he did lots of things in these kind of patterns with like sevens, in this case, 70. He started out his presidency by announcing 7 temples. But the 70th temple was unique. It seems like he received specific instruction about it, and he announced it outside of conference. And guess what? The Ephraim, Utah temple is one of these ones that follows this pattern of the 2 spires. So let's go back to this. Go to 2 spires. We'll go to Ephraim, Utah. Turn off this other thing here. And here you go. Oh, you can't really see it that well. You can't really see it that well with this. They don't have like the 3D rendering, but you can see, well, yeah, sorry. No, they do right here. Look, here's the rendering for it. So it has this like taller spire, and then there's kind of like I would call it a spire. It's kind of like a dome type feature, but I would say it's a spire. It follows that pattern. Okay, and you can kind of see it right here. So that's really, really interesting, isn't it? Okay, so let's zoom out. Okay, there we go. Sorry. So just a quick review. So we got Smithfield, Logan, Brigham City, Layton, Heber Valley, Linden, um, Ephraim, Utah, Manti, Utah, Vernal. So for some reason, we have this clustering of temples in Utah that follow this pattern. And then the only other two outside of Utah in the United States that does that is the Kansas City, Missouri temple and the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania temple. We talked about, and then we don't have any in South America or Central America, none in Africa. We talked about this one in Rome. And then there is one other one. And of all places, it's down here in New Zealand, the Wellington, New Zealand temple. What's going on with that? Well, let me show you a couple of things. This is an article that stuck out to me for some reason. I don't know why. This is from May 20th, 2019. President Nelson meets with New Zealand Prime Minister. And I don't know if it's the same Prime Minister or not. I don't even know her name. Jacinda Ardern. But anyway, he went there. It's not unusual for presidents of the church to meet with, dignitaries and leaders of nations. It was more rare. It was more rare to see whether President Nelson or anybody else travel outside the United States to visit with them. I'm trying to think if there was any other time that President Nelson did that. But this was part of a Pacific tour. It wasn't. Oh yeah, here we go, to 7 countries. Look at that. Was this part of his first global ministry tour? Did he do a second one? Okay, well, he went to 7 countries and he visited with the Prime Minister. I asked Grok if it had any ideas why New Zealand would stand out in church history or to the church. It pointed out that it was one of the earliest footholds in church history because of missionaries going there very early on. And then it pointed out the Maori, which that is significant. The Maori, let me read you a little bit about them. We're doing my spreadsheet called Quotes A through Z. What's currently row 531 for Polynesians, including the Maori. But this quote is specifically about them. This is President Spencer W. Kimball, an official report of the Samoa Area Conference held in Pago Pago and Apia, Samoa. President Spencer W. Kimball quoting Joseph Fielding Smith. I would like to say to you, brethren and sisters from New Zealand, you are some of Hagoth's people. Remember, Hagoth is a figure from the Book of Mormon. He was a Nephite. You are some of Hagoth's people, and there is no perhaps about it. End quote. He didn't want any arguments about it. That was definite. You are of Israel, and you have been scattered. Now you're being gathered. Got one more I want to read. This is also President Spencer W. Kimball. Is this a different? Yeah, I guess it's a different date. I thought to read to you a sacred scripture, which pertains especially to you, the islanders of the Pacific. It is in the 63rd chapter of Alma. He then read the account of Hagoth. And so it seems to me rather clear that your ancestors moved northward and crossed a part of the South Pacific. You did not bring your records with you, but you brought much food and provisions. And so we have a great congregation of people in the South Seas who came from the Nephites. And then he goes on and talks about New Zealand. Okay, here's a picture, here's a rendering of what that temple is going to look like. So again, this is on the unusual side, and I just showed you. I would have thought that these 2 spired temples would have been more common and more spread out, but they are not. Outside of Utah, they are rare. And this is one of those locations that's getting one. We just read about the Maori, the indigenous people of New Zealand, being descended from Nephi, the Nephites. And it made me think about this. Let's go to my spreadsheet called quotes false slash unverified. I have an unverified prophecy of Joseph Smith. So I tend to think that this is true because Mosiah Lyman Hancock, who was an early church member, I can't remember, but I think his father was like a president of the 70. But I feel like this is possibly right, but some of it could be misremembered, it could be embellished, or it may just be false. I have no way to verify this, but he said something interesting that's maybe worth considering in this context. Okay, so you can find this on the church website, the church history library, Mosiah L. Hancock autobiography. Right, he said, "The next day, the prophet came to our home and stopped in our carpenter shop and stood by the turning lathe. I went and got my map for him. Now, he said, I will show you the travels of this people. He then showed our travels through Iowa and said, here you will make a place for the winter, and here you will travel west until you come to the valley of the Great Salt Lake. You will build cities to the north and to the south, and to the east and to the west, and you'll become a great and wealthy people in that land. But the United States will not receive you with the laws which God desires you to live, and you will have to go to where the Nephites lost their power." I also think it's interesting that later on he mentions Snowflake, Arizona, which we have a temple there now. But anyway, if this is true, it seems like he's talking about the area around the Great Salt Lake, Utah, perhaps, that's the site where the Nephites lost their power. I'm not even going to try and figure that out. But if this is true, could that explain what we're seeing here? So we're looking at a place where some of the Nephites went to New Zealand. And then when we go to the United States, we have all these temples over here that follow this pattern. This pattern that seems to go all the way back to Adamonde-Amen. So you have a bunch in Utah where potentially, if that's true, the Nephites lost their power. We have one in Kansas City, very close to Adamonde-Amen, relatively speaking. The place that gave us this pattern in the first place. And then over here in Philadelphia. Couple more things. So those are just the 2-spired ones. We do have the 6-spired temples, and I don't know what to make of that. Those are still on the rare side, but we have the 6-spired temples. Some of you may have been like, well, what about the Las Vegas temple? Well, we got the Las Vegas temple, and I checked, and this one kind of diverges from those other hexagonal temples. For one thing, the front spire, like for the other hexagonal temples, the front central spire is actually like in the front of the building, like if this was the front over here. But in this case, it's like in the middle of the building, like the way that the long way that the building runs, it's like in the middle of that. And it doesn't seem that the spire is taller. I mean, it has an angel Moroni, but those other temples that we've looked at, the spire itself is clearly taller. So that's why I'm not putting this in the same category per se, but there is one of these type of temples in Las Vegas. And then you might also be asking about the Portland, Oregon temple, because that's also similar. So let's go up to Portland, Oregon. We actually, the last friends that came to visit us to see the church sites, this is where they're from. The Portland, Oregon temple, it is a hexagonal temple, but It has, oh wait, no, sorry. Oh my gosh. I was just looking at it from the top. I thought it had 8 spires. No. No, okay. No, this is part of this is in the same category. Sorry, I should have been more careful with that. I wouldn't count these kind of like knobby features right here as spires because these are clearly spires. They're pointy and they're tall. The Portland, Oregon temple. Yeah, that spire is taller in the front. It appears that it is. Okay, my mistake. So we're going to put Portland, Oregon with the other 6 spired temples. So that makes it so that we have, let me just count it up again, make sure I got this correct. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yep. 14 six spired temples that follow this pattern. And then for the 2 spired temples, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And then we got to add the Spanish Fork temple to that. So we have 14 of each. If you're counting the Las Vegas temple, then it would be 15 of the 6 spired temples and 14 of the 2 spired temples. So we're at kind of like an interesting time as far as that goes, where it's like even 14 of each. I don't know. Isn't that how do you explain it? And don't say that it's just coincidence. There's no way that it's just coincidence. This right here is this has got to be very intentional, at least like with the 2 spired temples. Why is it? Why would it be that all the 2 spired temples would be reserved for Utah, except for Kansas City and Philadelphia, and then Rome and New Zealand? Why? Like like when you think of, I think when a lot of people think of, if I was like in a primary class and I drew, like, say I was like in Michigan or Alabama or something, and I drew a picture of a 2 spired temple, the kids would probably just think that's normal. They wouldn't think anything of it. Like, oh yeah, 2 spired temple. Aren't there lots of 2 spired temples? No, there's not. There's not. So yeah. So that's why let's bring it back full circle. That's why when I saw this, I was just like, okay, it feels like something's going on here. So with this Spanish Fork, Utah temple, let's just review. In this area, there was a George A. Smith, an apostle, planned out a community, including a temple square, which we don't know where that is. But now we have a temple that's going to be built in that area. This was the last temple that President Nelson announced. In fact, it was his 200th, because that's how he announced 200 temples even, which already that by itself is it's kind of interesting that it's not like he like planned it that way. I don't think he planned to die like, okay, Lord, I need to live until I announce 200 temples. So the 200th temple that he announced, it was his final temple that he announced, and it follows this 2 spire pattern. I don't know. If you have more information, please feel free to send it my way. But that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.